thank you very much. So I'm Benedict Nolens, and I'm the head of the Hong Kong Center of the BIS Innovation Hub. And I have here with me Corine Zellweger and Maya Horowitz. So Corine is a professor at the University of Basel. She covers both monetary, financial markets, and economic law. And Maya works for Checkpoint Software Technologies, and Checkpoint is a leading provider of cybersecurity solutions to governments and to corporates globally. I think you would know Checkpoint. So maybe to set the scene for this panel, I think, to be honest, my head is already spinning after 2 hours, or it was less than 2 hours listening, so there was a lot that was brought up. So to bring us back a little bit to the BIS Innovation Hub, we center around 6 themes. So the 6 themes are CBDC, cybersecurity, FMI, green finance, open finance, and subtech. So they're quite distinct, right? Now, for this panel, we will be focusing on 2 of those, CBDC and cybersecurity. And so, indeed, there's always a good cop and a bad cop role. And the good cop is to say everything is going great, it's fine, it's wonderful, and it's going to be a success. And the bad cop role is to say, well, wait a second, it's actually really hard. So, okay, in my life, I've had the chance to play both the strategy role, which is the good cop role, and the risk role, which is the bad cop role. And now we are going to have to focus here on the risk. And in this panel specifically, we will focus on the legal complexities, as well as on the security complexities and the cybersecurity issues that we need to be conscious of in the context of CBDC. So I think you heard extensively in the prior panel, which I thought was an excellent session, where Governors Lagarde and Menon have referred extensively to security and resilience. And we also heard Governor Chong Yong-ri as well as Villeroy de Galhau referring to the importance of focusing on cross-border CBDC. Now, in this panel, we will be focusing similarly, actually, on cross-border CBDC, including multi-CBDC operations, including from, for example, a legal standpoint. But we will also touch up on retail CBDC, and specifically maybe different types of retail CBDC infrastructures from a cybersecurity standpoint. So against that backdrop, let me start with the first question, actually, to you, Corine. So we're going to start at this stage with these multi-CBDC platform efforts. And as highlighted by the governors, we have several underway. We've done multiple experiments in Switzerland. That was Jura and Helvetia. In Singapore, that was Dunbar. And in Hong Kong, we have continuously ongoing the Enbridge efforts. So question to you, Corine. For these multi-CBDC platforms, could you highlight to us what you think would be the key legal issues that we should be considering as we think about not just a technological concept for these things, but also bringing them actually into life and into market?
Yeah, thank you for this question, and thank you for having me here. And of course, there are these key legal issues. Let me first just outline them and then make a preliminary remark, and if time allows, I will dive a bit deeper. So to just mention them, of course, we start with the applicable law. If you have involved several jurisdictions, you have to ask this question, how to decide that on a contractual basis or on another basis. That would be a thing that we have to clarify. As well as the categorization of the CBDC itself, it will be really critical, crucial how to classify whether it is a currency. Is it possible to subsume it under the existing laws? There are some laws that allow to classify as a currency, whether it would be something else, kind of a certificate of fund. I'm of the conviction it's not a debt. I could lengthily explain why. It should not be a debt, no, not anymore. Of course, it's the role, the power of the central banks, how to involve them based on their existing mandate, or would we have to extend this mandate? The hub itself, the platform, what's its role? Who is assuming what kind of role, what part should be centralized or decentralized? We have question of privacy, we have question of AML, of course. Finality, I think we will come to that in particular a bit later. Liability and of course dispute resolution. These are just the keywords. And something that is really dear to my heart as a scholar and as an academic that I've been for the last 20 years, I would use this opportunity here to formulate a wish at present the central banks and including the BIS Innovation Hub is preparing important and extremely valuable groundwork in order to establish and enable the way for CBDCs. And to the extent that they look at legal issues and most probably later will recommend with regard to legal issues, they act not totally unlike legislators. And that leads me to the conclusion that they should, of course, voluntarily, but they should subject themselves to some principles that apply also to legislator. And one of those principles is transparency of legislative procedure. And that implies, of course, I think that all those reports that are published are of a great interest. However, they are of an extremely high level. And what I would wish for I give you an example for Enbridge, as we could read in the report. There were about 200 pages, I think, commissioned legal advice from external counsels with regard to 40 or more questions. And this is something extremely valuable. Why not make it public? Because to my perception, legal questions, how to apply existing law and how to amend them, cannot be something secret. That would be something extremely valuable and is a legal question in itself, how to share this, because that would make transparent how interests are pondered and how they are weighted and why they are weighted. And this is all the more true as it's, for now, the time being, it's rather wholesale CBDCs that are developed, but the work that is set now will also be the groundwork for later implementation of potential retail CBDC. So we should involve here academic world in the discussion and give them the opportunity to, in a critical way, review those aspects. So that was the remark in itself. I think maybe, or you want me to address the one or another key
No,
issue?
I think that was very useful. So, but you need to remind me if I captured them all. So the legal basis, dispute resolution, liability, finality, AML, and transparency.
You're right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, most of them. Yes.
Good. Okay, now over to you, Maya. So a question comparing financial systems and CBDC really. So what are the key pressing cybersecurity concerns of financial systems? And in your view, do they also apply to CBDCs? And are there any unique cybersecurity concerns for CBDCs that we should be aware of?
Yeah, so I think we are talking about the security of the CBDC sometimes as if we forget that today there are many security issues with the current financial system, right? I mean, we do trust our banks to hold the record of our transactions and how much money do we currently have, etc. And it's not like we go about in the world carrying a little physical notebook with all of our deposits and withdrawal, right? So of course, CBDC would complicate it, but the issue is also today that there is a lot of trust needed and a lot of security measures needed in order to make sure that this system is not broken. And it applies, the need for security applies both for the banks, but also the users or the customers. So a bank, of course, needs to protect itself from someone stealing funds, right? But also stealing private information because our financial data, our transactions, this is private information or financial information of a company that is also crucial. And then also just to keep the system on, to keep it live, because there are many types of attacks that can just take it offline, like something that we call a denial of service attack, where a bank can be attacked and just stop operating, and then you can no longer do any transactions. So there are many different risks to the bank, but also to the users. We also have to trust ourselves when we work with the financial system. So today there are so many types of attacks, of phishing attacks and social engineering, trying to steal our banking credentials and then use them to transfer funds to the bad guys. But it's not only phishing where we are kind of involved, but also malware. So there are different malicious applications that can be installed on our mobile devices with or without us knowing, and steal credentials again, but also maybe manipulate our wallet, our digital wallet, to steal funds. And we see it, for example, here in Switzerland. Almost 10%, 9.4%, I think, of all the organizations in Switzerland suffered an attack of a banking malware called Qbot within the last 3 months. Okay, so that's a very large number. And also just last week, we at Checkpoint Research we found and we published a report about a new banking malware or a mobile application that tries to mimic over 20 different key financial institutes in South Korea in order to manipulate users to give their credentials. So the attack surface here is very, very, very wide. And of course, when we add new technology like CBDC, there will be more ways to attack it, of course.
Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, I think this is also the observation of the central banks who've already introduced, or at least are in advanced pilots, is that, as you say, the different types of attacks, or what you call the attack surface, is very broad. Okay, so back to the legal topic, Karim. So going back to these multi-CBDC operations and then contrasting them a little bit to retail CBDC. So a multi-CBDC operation is intended to do cross-border payments, typically in a wholesale context. So it's quite different from a cash note today, a bill, right, or a coin. It is really a payment infrastructure. So the question to you is, do you think within that context, it would be possible to set it up as a contractual settlement finality as opposed to one in law? And the reason why this is very important is because changing the law in like 200 countries on Earth would take forever. So even if it is 20 countries on Earth, that would still take forever. So the point is to make these payment infrastructures, these multi-CBDC platforms, really even feasible in a foreseeable future, not even the near term, but a foreseeable future. We have to think about contractual settlement finality. And so I wanted to ask you what your view on that is, and also contrast that to retail CBDC, which maybe is slightly different there because people want to see it be used very much like cash notes, bills, etc.
Yes, thank you. I would like to take the opportunity to make a little distinction first and say something about finality, because this is the aspect that we have to clarify then on a contractual basis or on a statutory basis. And it's important to note that we have these more or less three types of finality. So we have the civil law finality, which is really the question of when becomes the transaction binding to the parties involved without any relation to a third-party system or something else. It's just when do I have the power of disposal? Am I entitled to dispose? And is there any kind of reason why this should not be binding for another reasons? Then we have the technical finality, which just occurs when I have, by software or hardware, no longer the opportunity to rewind a transaction or to stop it. And then what you're addressing, of course, is the settlement finality, which just applies within an environment where you, as somebody who provides a service, uses a system, so payment system basically, and it's the moment where this transaction becomes binding with regard to this system. And now to your question, I think in fact it would be the good way to to find a solution with a contractual solution, but however, first, if you have this contractual solution, then the participants that really want to have access to a platform would have to subject themselves to the rules. So once the rules are established, I think it's absolutely feasible. It's a pragmatic way. We already have that. We know it. It's really something that we could go along. The devil is in the detail, how to define the rules first. Because who is participating in this platform and who has a say? Who's going to take the lead, and how do you find a solution that is acceptable for everybody? So even there, you will have to struggle until you have to find something. However, if it's found once, I think that this could be a solution that is viable. In parallel to defining such rule books and then by contracts implementing on the participants, we should also follow the path that has been established the last 20 years by standard setting bodies, recommending best practices, and as I observe it, legislators quite voluntarily take over, implement in national law such best practices, and by that get closer to each other, pathing the way for later, maybe later, a solution in statutory law or international law. So that would be the way as I would see it.
And so would you see retail CBDC as different?
Exactly. I agree with you there. It's rather not the question of settlement finality. That's not so. I, as a consumer, I want to be sure that when I pay, it's final, it's cash-like, as you said. So here it's rather, in this context, the question of would you assign kind of a legal tender status to this kind of currency or whatever? If something has legal tender status, then normally by nature a payment is final. However, you could come to the same result also by consumer protection laws, for example. You could achieve that as well. And if you look back in history, we had important means of payments that did not have legal tender status, were freely and voluntarily used by the public. So it's not a must. Of course, it's a nice asset. If it's difficult to implement it from scratch in an existent national law, it would be viable, still viable without that. Last remark, would be extremely important for consumer, and not just for consumer, also for small and medium enterprises, which are quite comparable sometimes to consumer, is to have rules established with regard to dispute resolution, with regard to how to handle fraud events, as you just mentioned them, some kind of consumer redress. That would be something that has to be established first to spur trust in such a means of payment.
Great, thank you. So in summary, you said for these wholesale CBDC platforms, it can be contractual settlement finality, whereas for retail CBDC, it's important to focus on legal tender, but you're saying that would be ideal, but it's
in no way necessary.
Yes.
Really, believe me. It's just, I have loads of proof for that in historic view, yes, absolutely.
Great. So maybe I go now back to Maya and back to the cyber security topic. So could you just let us know and educate us really on the main features of the most prevalent cybersecurity defense approaches? And if you could illustrate it with some examples, that would be useful.
Sure. So just like the attack surface we said is very broad, and it applies both to the banks and the users, the defenses should as well. And so, of course, there's the defense on the central bank and the additional banks that take part in the CBDC system. And there's no one security solution because there is no one type of attack. And so the defenses should apply to the network level all the way to the actual machines and the servers and the cloud, if cloud is part of the solution, because the attack can be like attacking a vulnerable server with exploiting a vulnerability, or using credentials that were leaked in order to connect remotely. And so some of the defenses are also even password hygiene, okay? That's also part of the solution. But I think that protecting the banks is kind of common practice. And I think that the more pressing issue may be protecting the users, because today, I mean, and assuming that we will probably use our mobile device as part of the system, as our virtual wallet, and today only a fraction of us actually protect our mobile device, right? We don't really hear about these attacks, we don't protect against them, and maybe it's because we don't really care enough, but now that the mobile device is money, it should be protected. And it's not only the application, like the wallet itself, just like in a bank, we don't only protect the safe room, right? But we have guards in the entrance, right? And so there are many layers, and protecting the safe or the digital wallet itself is only like the last line of defense. And so protecting our mobile devices, each device that has this wallet in it is crucial. And I think that another thing that has nothing to do with technology, but we need to talk about when it comes to defense is education and awareness, because sometimes we as the users or even the bank employees, okay, we all can mistakenly open the door to threat actors in their attack. And so especially when a new technology comes in, we have to make sure that everyone is educated about it. And we talked, or previous speakers talked about the fact that we want this wallet to be available for everyone to use. And so it's even people who are not tech savvy at all. And so everyone needs to be educated on how to properly use it and how to make sure that we don't open the door for the attackers.
Yeah, great. We had a private session earlier where someone was observing that we do need to think about customer-centric design for the retail CBDC. Because to a certain extent, for example, having your own wallet and the private and public key is quite a nightmare for ordinary citizens, right? So I think it links up to what you said. So maybe an additional question to you. So there's been this long-standing debate whether CBDC should be direct distributed by the central bank or should be tiered through having the banks in the system, so to say. So my question is, from an architecture perspective, do you see one as more protected from a cybersecurity standpoint because there's more gates, let's say, to the system, or how would you look at this?
Yeah, I think the easy answer is to say that the direct one is problematic because all the eggs are in one basket, right? You attack the central bank, that's it. So again, during the denial of service attack, all the financial system is down. You can steal all the money from one place. So obviously the easy answer would be that the distributed system is better. But then it also opens up more vulnerabilities because there are more institutes that you need to protect. Yeah. So more vulnerabilities, more people with high access to the system, more potential culprits in an attack. And also it depends on who these institutes are. And I think it was Francois from the French Central Bank who said that maybe it should also be open to non-banks. So how do you vet them? How do you decide who takes place in this network? And how do you vet them both? I mean, are they good or bad, but also are they secure enough? So who's in charge of their defenses? When there's just the central bank, you know that you will defend it in every possible way. But when it's dozens of additional institutes, who knows, right? So it all depends on the defenses eventually. So in the distributed one, when a user or a threat actor cannot have direct access to the central bank, of course that's an additional safeguard, but it needs to be architectured the right way and with the right defenses in place.
Great. So one follow-up question on this. So from a cybersecurity perspective, is a traditional system more vulnerable or a DLT system? Which one of the two?
There's no right answer to it. Because again, there's either one place of potential threat, but also all the security is focused there. Whereas when it's distributed, every one of us can be the entry or the threat actor's entry to the system, but then there's also more verification. So eventually it will, it's a matter of how you do the architecture and the design of the system, and there's no one right solution. It's not black and white.
Got it. Okay, so one final question for each, one of those favorite questions. So favorite question for you, Corinne, is the trade-off between privacy and AML. How do you see this? Because there is this, people are distinguishing between anonymity and privacy, and the general public doesn't actually know the difference, to be honest, so.
Yeah, to be very briefly on that, but privacy would relate to the protection of private data, and stands for the idea that you do not have to reveal those data except you have either a statutory rule stating that you have to or you have a court order. That's the principle. Whereas the anonymity or the pseudonymity relates to a transaction where you have to reveal your identity, and then the question is to whom you have and why, and what threshold. So that's the principle. And I think it is an extremely crucial question. Nobody wants a financial system that is not fully has integrity. But on the other side, privacy is something as an institution that's not just the cranky spleen of some European people. It is really something that is at the core of every democratic system, because it defends our family life, it defends minority rights, and it defends political rights. It's a backstop against suppression, and we should move forward extremely careful and prudential in defining where do we really have to reveal this privacy, also with regard to a transaction, in order to defend some integrity. So it's an extremely difficult question, and we should be prudent, because if we look at cash payment, and I will close with that, in Switzerland, the payments that occur on a non-regular basis are in cash. It's about 40 to 60% still. You do not have any threshold where you do have to reveal your identity or to tell anybody for what you're using it, and we're not a country of criminals, more or less. So just moving this kind of cash on a CBDC basis, on an electronic basis, and just because we are able to apply any kind of privacy reducing instruments does not mean that we have to do that forcefully. So we have to really care about that.
Great. So Maya, quantum, we can't talk about cybersecurity and not talk about quantum. So what should central banks consider when they design CBDC in terms of quantum security, or how should they even consider it?
It's early to say, but I think that quantum computing, the main thing that it can influence is cryptography, and how secure cryptography is, because it makes it so much easier to interfere with cryptography. And so the two places where I see it relevant, one is cryptographic blockchain, but as far as I know, the current design of CBDC is not to use blockchain, but if it is chosen, then this is definitely a consideration. But then also the transactions that should be kept legitimate. I mean, when I talked about securing my mobile device and the bank, but what about the communication between us? And if it can be manipulated in an attack that is called man in the middle, meaning that I ask to send I don't know, $1,000 to someone else, but then someone in the middle can change the person to whom I'm sending these funds, then this is, of course, a potential attack, and it can be enabled by quantum computing because the encryption that I sent can be decrypted, then altered, and re-encrypted and sent to the bank. And so I think that these are the places where quantum computing should be considered.
Great. Well, that's it. We've run out of time, so thank you very much, and over to you, Ayu.